open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And welcome to this Tuesday edition of Kentucky's Voice. Glad you're with us today. We're here every day, 11 to noon on 970 WGTK live. Also streaming across social media platforms. You can catch us on Facebook Live and other of your favorite social media destinations, and also you can see us on TV today at 12:34 and 8 o'clock on Channel 21 WBNA right here in the greater Louisville area. We've got a packed show today focused on where Kentucky stands right now, politically, culturally, fiscally. Our General Assembly's on its home stretch. We're going to talk criminal justice policy today, but first of all, priorities here. Mr. Dan, our producer and director, and who holds this thing together, it's all about priorities, is it not? How about this very brief March Madness update? Since we're college basketball crazy, here's the latest on the men's side. Kentucky advanced past Santa Clara before falling to Iowa State in the second round. Louisville also fell in the second round to Michigan State after beating South Florida. So both Louisville and Kentucky's men's teams have been eliminated from the tournament, but not the women's. They're shining. The women it's a different story, as both Kentucky and Louisville women's teams are headed to the Sweet 16, where they'll play Michigan on Saturday. Louisville will, and Kentucky also will play Texas on Saturday. So it's Texas and Michigan, Kentucky playing Texas, Louisville women playing Michigan on Saturday, as they both advance to the Sweet 16 after the Lady Cards beat Vermont in the first round, and then Alabama by a point on Monday in the second round. And then Kentucky also beat James Madison and West Virginia to advance. All right, some of the events we want to make you aware of. The Hardin County Republican Party of Kentucky says it will host a debate on April 11th for all 27 candidates participating in the Republican primary in several different offices there, local offices including judge executive, sheriff, all the important local offices, magistrates. This is if you're in Hardin County, this is a chance to educate yourself about where candidates stand. I think all of those races are competitive, so there's more than one candidate in each of the races, even though it's a Republican primary. So that, I think, is a sign of a vigorous Republican Party in our county just to the south of us. And then this coming Monday night, our own Tom Fallbush, who hosts this Kentucky's Voice show on Thursdays and Fridays, will be speaking at Turning Point USA's monthly meeting at Evangel World Prayer Center Church at 7 p.m. That's at the Billtown exit 19 off of the Gene Snyder Freeway. And that's a chance for you to also come out and become familiar with this tremendous organization, which is really having an impact on our nation, and also the faith-based part of this effort is important. If you're a Christian, you're concerned about your faith impacting this country and how we can stand up both for our country and for our faith. This is a great opportunity for you to get plugged in with some other folks who are like-minded. And so if your conservative organization or group has an event coming up, we want to hear from you. We can get it on the air for you. And if you would like a speaker, let us know as well. But the best way to do this is through our Kentucky's Voice text line at 502-571-0970. Also, if you're a business owner, you want to advertise your business, let me know on the Kentucky's Voice text line at 502-571-0970. You can also use that line to text us your thoughts and opinions about what we talk about on the show, or just about concerns you have about what's happening with Iran or the political sphere in Kentucky or across the nation. We only have an hour here, so we can't cover everything, but we'd like to know what's on your mind, and we'll try to get those texts at least read on the air. Speaking of politics, coming up, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear trying to play on the national stage, and he's trying to do it by attacking J.D. Vance over the vice president's Kentucky-Appalachia identity, and in the process is just further confirming that he's no moderate. More on that coming up. And we'll talk General Assembly and criminal justice policy with my friend Joey Comley from Kentucky Ride on Crime. Stay with us here on Kentucky's Voice. Great show ahead.
kyvoice.org.
Thanks for staying with us there today on Kentucky's Voice. We want to hear from you, 502-571-0970. And I want to hear from you about what you think about Andy Beshear's run for president. He's really running for president in a party that's really in disarray right now. It has really no coherent message. It doesn't have any leadership. And so his strategy is to bring out some tired arguments from the past. And one of those is criticizing Vice President J.D. Vance for Hillbilly Elegy. It's a book that was then turned into a movie, a very successful project. It was a New York Times bestseller, and it was both successful both as a book, which I read the book, and also as a movie, very popular and really made an impact on our society. It was really a cultural phenomenon. But what it is Vice President Vance's personal memoir, and he talks about the time he spent in Kentucky and eastern Kentucky, Breathitt County, Jackson, Kentucky, which is one of the poorest counties in America and certainly in our state, in our Commonwealth. But his grandparents were there. He spent a lot of time there as a child, and then moving back and forth from there to Middletown, Ohio. And so Andy Beshear was up in Middletown on Saturday, going into J.D. Vance's hometown to criticize the vice president, questioning his Appalachian roots and slamming his book for what he says was portraying harmful stereotypes. And so all of this is a lead up to the 2028 presidential election, in which Beshear is really trying hard to make traction with this. But let's hear some of the comments that Beshear has made in the past about J.D. Vance. And let's go with clip one there, Dan.
What I said about J.D. Vance isn't because of anything that is rumored about me or any role he stepped into.
Yeah,
it's
right.
because
Yeah.
he has exploited and attempted to attack my fellow Kentuckians. And it's my job as governor to stand up when that happens, to spend some summers or parts of summers or weekends or come into special events and then to claim that you know the people of Eastern Kentucky, the culture of Eastern Kentucky, to make money off of that claim and then to call our people names is just not acceptable. If anybody else had done it, I'd be speaking up too. Listen, I'm from Kentucky. This is my home. It will always be my home no matter what, and I will always stand up for our people.
So a lot of selective outrage there. You wonder, this guy who's governor, who doesn't stand up for the unborn, doesn't stand up for life, doesn't stand up for protecting your tax dollars, doesn't stand up for you keeping more of your hard-earned money, and on and on and on, doesn't stand up for kids in school getting a better education when 2 out of 3 of them are failing in our current public education system in Kentucky. And yet he's going to stand up for Kentuckians. Yeah, by golly, he's going to stand up. It's my job as governor, he said. But I want to talk for a moment about what Vance actually wrote about. He wrote about being raised by a mother battling addiction, a family that was unstable. He was really saved by strong, no-nonsense grandparents, as he wrote in his book, which, by the way, they were the ones in Kentucky, Mama and Papa, who instilled discipline and loyalty in him. So this isn't J.D. Vance, stereotyping Kentuckians or Eastern Kentuckians. He was very honest about the challenges of that part of our state and that part of our nation in terms of addiction, in terms of poverty. And he wanted to do something about it. So now he's risen really pretty quickly in the ranks, became a United States Senator, really has been a very driven, disciplined, ambitious person. But as I thought about this, it's no wonder that Beshear and his fellow leftists don't like this book and this project, because Vance argues about things like personal responsibility. He argues for family stability. He argues for a work ethic that's as important as the economic conditions in shaping outcomes. So he advances cultural matters. He talks about the dignity of work. He highlights being proud of honest labor and the damage done to communities like those in Appalachia, many of them, where jobs are lost, and with them goes purpose and hope. J.D. Vance argues that in some struggling communities, there's a pattern of excusing bad habits, like not showing up to work or giving up too easily. And, Beshear framed this as him saying people were lazy. But that's not at all what he said. Obviously, Andy Beshear hasn't read the book, and just is probably taking what somebody told him, or some Cliff Notes version of it, or some leftist version of it. And another thing that Vance says in there is that government is not a cure-all to the problems we have as a commonwealth or as a country. He suggests that while policy can help things, it cannot fix cultural patterns, destructive cultural patterns, destructive behavioral patterns. Real change has to come from within communities and within individual hearts. He talks about how upward mobility is hard but possible. Vance's own path. He went into the military in order to be able to go to college. He ended up at Yale Law School. He shows it can be done, but it requires help. It requires hard work. It requires determination. It requires mentors and structures and tough choices. He attacked the breakdown of family structure. He points to the absence of fathers, domestic instability, generational dysfunction as key drivers of poverty. And then he talked about learned helplessness. Now, this is where Beshear is getting his whole accusation that Vance accused the people of being lazy. And let's play clip 2 on that. Let's listen to what he said about that.
I'll be honest. Your former senator and now our vice president burns me up. He wrote an entire book that trafficked his tired stereotypes about the people in my state. Calling the people who mined the coal that powered the Industrial Revolution, helped us to win 2 world wars, he called them lazy. He said that addiction is the fault of the people struggling, not the opioid companies that flooded our communities with thousands of pills for every individual. As AG, I sued more opioid companies than any other in the country. If I would have found more, I would have sued them too.
So what J.D. Vance really talked about was a mindset in some communities that expects failure or blames others or makes progress harder. And he talked about in his book a culture where people feel stuck and powerless, which can lead to poor choices and passivity. And he critiques the mindset, not just individuals. Vance argues that in some struggling communities, there's a pattern of excusing bad habits, like not showing up to work or giving up too easily. He also emphasized the importance of faith and community institutions. He talked about strong local institutions being buffers, crucial buffers against decline, like churches and families and civic groups being buffers against decline in communities. He urged Americans to take cultural problems seriously, not just economic ones, and to rebuild norms that produce stable, productive lives. These are all what he covered here. And now Beshear, why don't we ever hear him talk about the dignity of work or how upward mobility is possible? Or why don't we ever hear him attack the Obama era of regulations that caused those coal mines to close and resulted in many of the coal miners turning to addiction? And yes, I think the drug companies are partially responsible for that, but there's a personal responsibility issue here. And there's a clear difference of opinion on these cultural matters. Now, Vance's office didn't respond directly to this on Saturday to the press, but through his spokesman, told the New York Times that Beshear, quotes, end up humiliating himself, quote, every time he criticizes the vice president. Pardon me. And then I want to get to a comment that Nate Morris made real quick. Nate Morris is one of the Republicans running to fill the seat of Senator Mitch McConnell in the next senatorial election later this year, and is in the primary right now, of course, the primary stages. But Nate Morris blasted Beshear's latest comments, writing in the next post on Sunday that Beshear should, quote, stick to what you know, which is cashing in on your daddy's last name while pretending that you earned it. Beshear's father, of course, is Steve Beshear, who served as governor of Kentucky from 2007 to 2015. A governor, by the way, who expanded our Medicaid rolls, who took full advantage of Obamacare to drastically increase the cost of Medicaid to our state, which our General Assembly is trying to grapple with right at this very moment. And then he wrote, J.D. Vance built himself from nothing, while Andy Beshear built himself from nepotism and a family Rolodex, end quote. And, so I think that's a really good comment. I think that's really true. The difference, we're going to see the differences clearly defined in two guys that are expected to run for president. Of course, J.D. Vance would have to be considered much more of a favorite than Andy Beshear. I wonder what the national response is going to be as people really find out, who Andy Beshear really is. Beshear's also taken some other pointed jabs at Vance in the past. One day after he delivered a speech at the 2024 Democratic National Convention, Beshear used some screen time to call out the then Ohio senator for his stance on abortion during a TV interview. He said, quote, J.D. Vance calls pregnancy resulting from rape inconvenient. Inconvenience is traffic. Make him go through this. And then Vance responded by saying Beshear's comments implied the governor wished for a member of Vance's family to be sexually assaulted, end quote. What a disgusting person, Vance wrote. Vance also denied, by the way, that charge, referring to rape as an inconvenience. We'll talk a little more about this and the fact that elections have consequences. Also coming up later in the program, Joey Comley from Kentucky Ride on Crime. We'll talk about criminal justice policy in this year's legislative session. Stay with us.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Thanks for staying with us here on Kentucky's Voice today. Jim Waters in with you, as I am most Tuesdays. We'd like to hear from you. You know, Kentucky's Voice is our collective voices, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about our discussion here about J.D. Vance and Andy Beshear's attack on him. 502-571-0970 is the Kentucky's Voice text line. Also like to hear from you if you have thoughts or opinions on whatever else is going on in our state or country right now. We want to hear from you, and lots of you. And this off our Kentucky's Voice text line: Beshear should shut up and take care of the fraud and corruption of his administration and the lack of transparency. He tries to take credit for others' work. He hound dogs the media after every death. It's all about him. He's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. J.D. Vance, on the other hand, served, said the Kentucky's Voice text line texter. And on this, and of course, we're talking about Governor Beshear's attack again on J.D. Vance over the weekend, attacking his hillbilly elegy, his story about how his grandparents moved from Kentucky to Ohio amidst a pregnancy scandal and the desire to find a better life, better economic opportunities. That was not that unusual for people to move from Appalachia up to the Midwest, what we would consider more of the blue collar, blue belt, if you will, of our country. Lots of manufacturing, the manufacturing belt. Many jobs became available during this time period. But even after they moved, even as a child, J.D. Vance talked about going back to Jackson, Kentucky during summers and what happened there, what he observed growing up, and the great challenges, the poverty, the cultural challenges that he observed, and he was very honest about it. And this is a best-selling book. It spent weeks on the New York Times bestseller. And so Beshear now is attacking this, and Beshear is putting out a book of his own in September. And I'll try to find one of the 5 or 10 people that might read that book that give an honest opinion about it. But I think this is really telling. And I want to make a couple of observations before I move on, and I want to move on from this. But here are my observations and analysis. J.D. Vance has every right to tell his personal story as he remembers it, as he saw it. And, it's a really powerful, interesting thing. Even if there were things that were exaggerated, I don't think there were, because I've spent some time in that part of the country, and I believe that it was very much the case, and has been very much the case, these challenges that he addressed. But as a child, he was writing what he experienced as a child, and how it affected him. And it's his personal story. It's his memoir. This is not a piece of research. This is J.D. Vance's personal story, and he has a right to tell it, and he has a right to tell it as he saw it and as he experienced it. And I can say this right now, he did not misrepresent what happened there. From his perspective, he told it, and he also used it to show how it shaped his development. And what was it that he has become? He's become one of the most formidable political leaders in our country. Another observation is the fact that Beshear is attacking this reveals a concern he has about the powerful connection that Vance's personal story can have and likely will have on a future J.D. Vance for president campaign. So this is very telling that he's very concerned. He knows that this is going to be part of Vance's narrative, his personal story, so he's trying to discredit it. But again, person has a right to tell their story. I might even think, and I have thought at times that people did exaggerate their story. But as I thought about this as a child growing up, this was how it impacted him, and that's very important, I think, for us to know. And then the last thing, and I alluded to it before our break, but folks, elections have consequences. And, we simply cannot have a repeat of what happened in the 2023 gubernatorial election. And, as I was looking at this today, and yesterday and today, preparing for this show, it occurred to me that, in order for Andy Beshear to have been reelected governor, he had to get a lot of Republican votes. And the fact is that Andy Beshear got a total of 693,370 votes in his reelection effort. But the number of Democrats who voted were only 604,368. Daniel Cameron, who was his opponent, got 626,196 votes, but there were 641,203 Republicans who voted. So most of them voted for one of these two candidates. Granted, I don't know what the independent numbers were, but there were at least 15,000 Republicans who voted who didn't vote for the party's nominee, and there were 89,000 Democrats, or 89,000 voters who voted for Andy Beshear, the Democratic nominee, who were not Democrats. And so elections have consequences, and now Beshear is going to use his reelection as Kentucky's governor to run his presidential campaign. So I'm just saying, and we had some Republicans that endorsed him. And I get it. I think some older Republicans, some more moderate Republicans, see him as someone who saved us during the pandemic and during COVID, and he made them feel safer, and on and on. But is this the guy we really thought we were reelecting? Maybe we would ask Republicans, is there some buyer's remorse here? Well, anyhow, moving on. And by the way, I'd like to hear from you on that, and then we'll move on. 502-571-0970 is our Kentucky's Voice text line. Do you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts about Andy Beshear attacking J.D. Vance, his personal memoir? He's not attacking necessarily his positions. Now, he did on abortion, of course. But I've heard very few attacks on positions, on policy issues, and much more on his personal story, which I think is just disgusting. That's my view, and you can disagree, and that's what America's all about. But I'd love to hear from you about this. 502-571-0970. If you voted for Andy Beshear as a Republican in that election, and you have buyer's remorse, or you still stand by that decision, love to hear from you as well on our Kentucky's Voice text line. Now, I want to quickly move to the legislative session, and the 2026 General Assembly session is sprinting toward its final days. Of course, the major responsibility of legislators in the General Assembly is to pass a balanced, responsible, balanced budget. And so now both houses, both bodies, both the House of Representatives and the State Senate, have passed their versions of the budget, but they're much different. The Senate version provides substantially more funding for some areas, for example, for Medicaid than the House did. Bottom line is the Senate budget spends more than the House. The House wanted to cut Medicaid spending, which I was in favor of. The Senate has backed away from that. Anyhow, first of all, here's what happens next. The two versions have to be worked out. So there will now be a conference committee that will meet and hammer out the differences in the two budgets. Then they will send the final version that they agree on to the governor. He will certainly veto parts of it, and the House and Senate moving quickly now in order to give themselves the time to override any vetoes that the governor may issue, which we'll expect to see some of those. The Senate version, along with really providing substantially more funding for Medicaid, I don't have a good reason for this. I mean, the reason we're having increased and explosive costs in Medicaid is because we expanded eligibility for the program during Steve Beshear's administration. And as a result of that, hundreds of thousands of people now added to the Medicaid rolls that taxpayers now have to pay for, and that has increased the cost of Medicaid. Stay with us. Coming up, more on the General Assembly session with our friend Joey Comley from Kentucky Right on Crime. He'll talk about criminal justice policy and priorities during this session and what he thinks about what is going on in Frankfort. We always appreciate him coming by, joining us. Stay with us right here on Kentucky's Voice. Don't go away.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Thanks for staying with us today here on Kentucky's Voice. My name is Jim Waters. Glad to have you along. If you're a business owner, you want to expand your customer base and grow your brand, strengthen your brand, give me a call, 502-571-0970. Well, I should say, give me a call. Give me a text. How about that? Text me, and I'll follow up with you. We'll put together a marketing advertising plan, and you can be a part of this show as well, and of our conservative powerhouse here, 970 WGTK, where you're listening live to this program, and we're also streaming live on social media. And also join us on television this afternoon, 12:30, 4 and 8 o'clock on Channel 21 WBNA in the greater Louisville area. And hope you'll make that part of your day. And also, we're glad to have with us now on today's show Joey Comley. He's joining us. Joey is the state director for Kentucky and Tennessee at Right on Crime. He's a longtime criminal law practitioner, a retired Army lieutenant colonel. In fact, he specializes in representing military members of our military, both, I think, active and retired. He can correct me on that if I'm not right. But Joey, you're someone who's kind of understands both sides of the aisle there, both the prosecution and defense side. Anyhow, welcome, my friend. Thanks for taking time to join us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Jim. And hello, listeners of Kentucky Voice.
Well, Joey, let's start with a little general analysis of what's happening with the legislature right now. I know you are extremely involved in criminal justice policy, and you're at the legislature quite a bit. Give us your overview of how things are going. This has been an interesting session. I think, of course, it's a budget session, so that also always adds interest to what's going on, and another dynamic, oftentimes even on policy that might not be directly budget related. But what are you seeing happen in Frankfort in terms of crime, criminal justice policy, public safety? Which issues are getting a lot of attention? Which ones need more? Which ones are getting more attention than they should? Give us the lowdown from your view.
Well, Jim, in your last session, you mentioned the budget, and I don't think any discussion on any bill this session took place without consideration of the budget. And it should be that way, right? That is the priority number one for both the House and the Senate in a budget year, is to make sure that, look, they're properly shepherding and stewarding the utilization of our hard-earned money that we give to Frankfurt. So kudos to the General Assembly in recognizing that and committing to that and making it a priority. Now, on the criminal justice side of things, I think it's been a very productive session. It's been a session where lawmakers have genuinely looked at kind of front-end justice issues. I call them front-end justice issues because they're looking at kind of what's driving criminal behavior in the Commonwealth. And they're seeing if they can craft policy solutions that actually reduces crime. As opposed to, well, we just need to create more laws, we need to lock more people up, and we need to keep them there longer.
Yeah, let me jump in on that. And
go ahead.
I think that represents at least the beginning of a change, doesn't it, in how we've seen criminal justice policy dealt with in the past. And we'll get into specific legislation in a moment. But in your view, generally speaking, is there more of an openness now, even among conservatives, among Republicans, to think more widely, if you will, about this issue?
I would say there's a inclination to just think, right? It doesn't take any thinking, Jim, to lock them up. If lock them up is your solution, well, then you're essentially engaging in the behavior of the 1950s. And as we saw states and counties and cities go bankrupt over, locking everyone up, I think people are starting to think a little bit and engage in the criminal justice system and say, hey, what do we need to do to keep our children, as a prime example, from engaging in this problematic and ultimately criminal behavior in our school systems against our teachers, disrupting the learning environment for the other 29 kids in the class. And you've seen focused efforts in Kentucky this year that are aimed at engaging kind of those problem sets with creative solutions that, don't give kind of parity to the one child in the classroom anymore. Sorry, but you've subordinated kind of your rights and your interests in your quality education when you've engaged in violent acts against your teacher. Sorry. I mean, the law that doesn't account for that, address that, and kind of uplift the other 29 kids and a teacher who's in that classroom, I mean, it requires correction. And kudos to, Matt Nunn and other folks who have really led the charge on that this session.
Yeah. So give us some insight onto legislation that has happened and what that would actually do, how that would actually affect this issue.
So we'd get into a numbers crossword if I started naming all of the juvenile justice
so there's several,
bills that have been filed
right.
this session. But what I can tell you is the lawmakers have been genuinely concerned about violence in the classroom, right? Preventing that, ensuring that they're protecting teachers and the rest of the classmates, ensuring that they are appropriately removing the child who's engaged in either threatening or violent behavior in the classroom, ensuring that there's a pathway for that child to make it back into school, assuming that they've dealt with their issues that led up to that criminal conduct. And then also, hey, if they can't deal with those issues successfully, then they can kind of stair step further into the criminal justice process if necessary.
Well,
there's also been efforts to kind of bring in kind of what I think is the most influential members of the community in ensuring that child's success or failure, and that's the family, right? So we're starting to look at, hey, how do we ensure that accountability for juveniles extends to the people who have the greatest influence over that child's life, i.e. the parents and their caregivers?
Yeah, we're speaking with Joey Comley, who's the Kentucky and Tennessee State Director for Right on Crime. And thanks for joining us here today. And we're talking criminal justice policy, and the legislature, always a topic of great interest to our audience. Off our Kentucky's Voice text line, this comment: criminal juveniles in this state are out of control, especially in Louisville. The endless do-gooder programs and committees have failed. LaGrange Reformatory is empty. It would be an excellent place for a statewide juvenile correction center. Louisville is still without a juvenile correction center. Joey, from your view, is this the right? Is this a good idea? You know, what is it what specific things, maybe one or two things you would say need to happen to fix this problem?
Jim, fixing,
or address it,
city,
effectively, yeah.
Inner city criminal youth, I think, is an extraordinarily complex problem. I think reformatories should be part of the solution, but are not the solution. Mm-hmm. Similar to, jails and prisons are part of the solution, but not the solution. Mm-hmm. I think there's so many of these kids who are coming from homes, quite frankly, where their parents might be incarcerated. And essentially, we all know that when you incarcerate a parent, and especially if it's for a nonviolent, non-sexual, non-serious offense, but nevertheless, you've broken up the home, you place those children in someone's care who's, quite frankly, probably not suited to care for them, certainly didn't sign up for that, right? Or they're in the foster care system. Either way, you've given that kid an excuse in their mind to act out. Mm-hmm. And where are they going to act out? They're going to act out in schools. They're going to act out on the street when they're walking to and from their schools. And they're ultimately going to, destabilize, disrupt, and potentially terrorize our neighborhoods. And I think, portions of Louisville have seen that. So some of the well-intentioned laws that have passed this session, the one that I'm most proud of is the Family Preservation and Accountability Act. And if we got time, I'll jump into that a little bit, Jim.
Yeah. Before, if we can, just on the juvenile justice issue for just one more moment, Dan, do we have time to play that clip 3? So I'd like, Joe, I'd like for you to hear this comment from Trey Watson, who's a Republican strategist here in the state, about juvenile justice and the failure of this administration. I'd like to get your response to that. Go ahead, Dan.
Sure.
I think one of Andy Beshear's biggest liabilities as he attempts to run for president is the woeful shape of the juvenile justice system and the correctional system in general under his care as governor. And, maybe there's something in there where they don't particularly want to invest extra money in because it might make it look like Andy Beshear's making moves on it when he's had 6 years to make moves on fixing the juvenile justice system. He hasn't shown a real concern about it until he's running for president. Does some politics get into play with money in that system? I don't know, potentially.
Yeah, Joey, your thought, what kind of grade, I guess, would you give Frankfurt on dealing with juvenile justice and the correction system in general, which goes to your comments a moment ago?
I'd say a C-.
Yeah.
Right. In that it's certainly not been ignored. But I think it's more complicated than any sort of issue that's going to be solved, in one session. You can't put a blanket policy out there and correct, problems within households, which is really what juvenile problems, that's where they originate. It's a problem in the home. It's a problem in the neighborhood. It's a problem in the community. Mm-hmm. It's where these children are not.
Yeah.
Right? I know we're on a conservative radio show, and I don't have a problem saying it because I'm not beholden to anybody except, my Lord and Savior. Those kids need to be in church.
Yeah,
those kids need to be.
Well, you're in the right place to say this.
Values.
You're right. You're in the right place to say this. This is Christian based. We've never backed away and shied away from saying that. And Joey, I don't think it's a coincidence. Do you that only 1 in 3 of our kids are doing well academically at proficient at grade level and really on track to succeed academically and in their education system. Is it a coincidence that we see such a problem with the juvenile system at the same time that we're failing our kids in school, in public education in many ways?
You hit the nail on the head, Jim. Yeah. If kids aren't in their homes, they're typically in schools. So those are the 2 most influential kind of environments that children find themselves in. If we're not working on those, we're not correcting juvenile misbehavior.
Stay with us. More from Joey Comley and criminal justice in Kentucky coming up on Kentucky's Voice. Thanks for staying with us.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Fascinating discussion here about criminal justice reform on Kentucky's Voice. This is the conservative, common sense, Christian-based media outlet for Kentucky, pushing back against legacy corporate media. And the problem with the legacy media is not always how they cover things. They just don't cover things a lot of times. There's just not the interest there. But we're finding with our great Kentucky's Voice audience that you're engaged and you're tuned in. We want to hear from you. 502-571-0970 is our Kentucky's Voice text line, 502-571-0970. And very delighted to have with us today for another segment, staying with us, Joey Comley, who is the Tennessee and Kentucky State Director for Right on Crime. We're talking criminal justice policy, a lot of flurry in Frankfort, but let's get to what we might actually see happen as far as legislation passing during this session. Joey, I know an issue that's been important to you and really high on your priority list is the sentencing of caregivers, doing all we can to preserve the family, even for those who may have committed crimes, perhaps nonviolent crimes. I guess why is this so important, and why should a law and order audience care about this, if I can ask it that way?
So crime is kind of a family business, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes it is multi-generational. So if you live in a house filled with crime, statistics and data will show that you are likely to either be callous to criminal behavior around you, which is not what we need. We don't need bystanders in our community. We need active witnesses and participants preventing crime and reporting crime, or you are likely to repeat the same criminal behavior or engage in similar criminal behavior as an adult. So I think looking at the home as a starting point for legislation is great in terms of the intent. And when we unpack kind of probatable sentences in Kentucky as they exist, we can easily see that 5 out of the 6 options for any judge, and I think that's in KRS 533.010, all of those options, 5 out of 6, require the individual to leave the house and be sequestered in some type of program, which means they cannot continue to care for either elderly loved ones, friends and family who are living with them, or their children, which means those options are unavailable. So when you move that person out of the home, and again, it's a consequence of their criminal act. So I'm not shedding any tears here, but I am shedding tears over the consequence that has on our hard-earned tax money in Frankfurt, paying for the care of their loved ones and paying for, their keep while they're in prison. Instead, keep them in some type of programming that allows them to continue to work, continue to pay taxes, to pay for their reformative programming, and to continue in their family obligations to their children. Jim, the other day, my pastor was talking about the obligations of a man to provide for his household. And scripture tells us that, a man who has the ability and does not provide for his household is even worse than an unbeliever.
Yeah.
And why is that? It's because the consequence of that man's unbelief does not affect all of those other children of God from reaching God's kingdom. But when he doesn't provide for them, it essentially sends all of them down a path, right, where they're infinitely more likely to fail in life.
Interesting.
And be engaged in the criminal justice system. So you want to talk about juvenile justice? Let's fix the parents. Let's keep them accountable to not only their family and their children, but also to the law.
Well, and I think you've also in the past talked about how this can even improve public safety, right? Doing this will not necessarily weaken public safety if there are safeguards in place.
Absolutely. I mean, the backstop for all of these programs, Jim, is incarceration. If the individual fails in their probatable sentence, well, then they just get locked up. And every failure is not continuing criminal behavior. We're not talking about violent offenders here. We're not talking about repeat offenders here. We're not talking about people that are preying on our Commonwealth's children. We're typically talking about people that have substance abuse and acute mental health issues, and they've engaged in some criminal behavior either because of that or that was, part and parcel to those problems. So we need to fix those problems. We need to enable them, to gain the tools so that they don't engage in that behavior in the future.
So,
right. Go ahead.
Oh, well, no, good point. That's I think a view that we need to consider. And obviously, speaking with Joey Comley here, the Kentucky and Tennessee State Director for Right on Crime. Joey, on that quickly on the family preservation, are we looking at legislation passing this session? Are you optimistic?
I think we are. We've already passed successfully out of the House on that. That was House Bill 464. And then we've got its sister in the Senate, which just needs, actually vice versa. The Senate bill passed, that's 190. The sister House Bill 464 still needs to get to a floor vote, but it successfully passed out of Families and Children in the House last week. And it passed, like I said, through the judiciary in the Senate and then through the floor several weeks ago. So I expect that to pass. And then a second one that I expect to pass, I'm sorry, jumping around a bit, is clean slate automation. So that's Senate Bill 290. That passed out of the judiciary last week and should get a floor vote here pretty soon, probably this week. So it's short on time, but it really is one of those bills that, fits perfectly with our commitment to fund a education program for folks who are in prison. So if they're qualified prisoners for continuing education, KCTS has set up essentially a campus for these folks so that when they come back into our communities, they come back as givers and participants in the community as opposed to predators who are just taken from the community.
So
they're coming out with some job skills.
Right.
And then, of course, we want them to be able to use those job skills and that education,
Right.
which means we have to address their criminal records, assuming, Jim, that they've lived crime-free for the requisite 5, 7, or 10 years, depending on their criminal history.
Yeah, so there are some legitimate and reasonable hoops to jump through, but it's not impossible, which in the past, right, it's been pretty impossible, nearly impossible for many people to get to a place where they could be employable without that record, right?
Yeah, so for example, Jim, I've volunteered at some of these expungement clinics, and you know what you're doing in those expungement clinics is facilitated on site by the Kentucky State Police and the Administrative Office of the Courts, giving comprehensive criminal justice background checks to these folks who have signed up for the clinic. Then they're reviewed with an attorney who's going through and checking by statute each and every individual offense, whether or not it is a eligible conviction for an expungement, or if it's subject to enhancement periods based on, cross-referencing all of the other, violations in that person's past. And then, and only then, does that attorney give them some advice. And they typically have to come to like a follow-up session of 30 minutes to an hour and a half with either a legal aid society or a private attorney that they've remained. And that's, Jim, that's just to start the petition for the expungement.
Yeah. Now, also on the other end, this is something that could help our employers and our workforce, is it not?
Jim, that's why the chamber is, wholeheartedly in support of Clean Slate. They've seen the numbers, they've seen the statistics. They know that, hey, look, Kentucky is not generating any additional workforce other than our kids that are going to school and staying here. Thank God there's opportunity here, and our adult population that is ready, willing, and able, assuming we can correct some of these, scarlet letters that continue to kind of label them as one sort of member of the Commonwealth, a criminal, as opposed to a productive member, when some of these convictions, Jim, are decades in the past. And again, they're nonviolent, non-sexual, low-level offenses. You're talking about misdemeanors, bar a few of them. There's some select misdemeanors that, won't qualify, and then enumerated Class E felonies, right? So our lowest level felony offenses, some of them are eligible for expungement.
And we classify those felonies for a reason. If it's not for this reason, then it's really useless, isn't it? I mean, those classifications, if we're certainly classifying them on how dangerous we think that person is and what their chances for rehabilitation are. So the fact that we have those classes, right, I think should indicate that that we should look at that in terms of those decisions and that have already been made about how that person, what kind of crime it was and how dangerous it was to society.
That's precisely it, Jim. We've categorically kind of chunked our criminals into, these different bundles, and each bundle carries with it, consequences both at the front end of sentencing them, during their stay of incarceration as to, their propensity for violence. So it affects our prisons and jails and how they're housing them and what programming is available to them. And then also, how they're treated on the back end, what's required of them when they're actually released from prison.
Yeah, well, Joey, I know one other issue one of the other issues that you have really been passionate about is arguing about Kentucky's fines and fees system in our jails. We have about 30 seconds. Where do we stand on that? And I think we're going to have to keep working on this.
Yeah, you're right, Jim. So that's one that's actually, it's going to take more than one session. It might take more than two. God forbid it takes three. But it is just like any bill that kind of opens the door and sheds some light on a dark room, which is the collection of fines and fees in Kentucky,
Very good.
it's going to take a little bit more interest.
Joey Comley, Right on Crimes, Kentucky State Director. Thanks for joining us, and thank you today. Have a great day.